Jesus has this interaction with this woman at a well. And, what a weird way to start this off. But the fact of the matter is this passage has probably changed my life more than any other passage that I've read in the entirety of the scriptures. He has this interaction with this woman, and she's a woman. He's not supposed to be talking to women. She's a Samaritan. He's not supposed to be talking to Samaritans. And Jesus is often doing the thing that we think he shouldn't do when he's actually doing the thing that we should be doing. But that's not what I even want to focus on right now. She perceives really quickly that he is more than a man. And he asks if he's a prophet. And she asked this question, and I'm so glad that she had the courage in this moment to realize the moment that she had stepped into with Jesus and asked this question. She said, "Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." She's asking, where do we worship? How do we worship? As a worship leader, as a creative pastor, I want to know the answer to this question. Every day I exist to answer this question. How can I lead people in bringing an offering that is pleasing to God? So I want to know the answer to this question. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. We're going to understand a little bit more about this question and the way he responds. But he says to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You, the Samaritans, worship what you do not know. We, the Jews, worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews." And so he's kind of introducing these parallel viewpoints, that the Samaritans would have these mountaintop emotional experiences with affections pouring out and tears and weird stuff happening. Whereas the Jews would be in the temple, and it would be scheduled, and it would be orderly, it would be liturgical, it would be according to Levitical law, it would be according to the Torah, it would be led by these priests in perfect garment. And so she's asking, which is it? Where do we find God, essentially? How do we please God? How do we worship God? Jesus is saying it's not going to be either of these. He continues, "But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth." And so what he's saying here is it's no longer going to be this mountaintop experience filled with affections, filled with emotion. And it's no longer going to be this truthful, doctrineful, liturgical, orderly experience. But what he's looking for is he's looking for a perfect marriage of the two. He's looking for a perfect balance of spirit and in truth. And I think this is powerful, and I think it speaks so perfectly to the job that we have as worship leaders, to always be seeking the balance between spirit and truth. That means we want full affections. It means we want heartfelt adoration. It means we want to be experiencing the gifts and pushing into the Spirit and allowing our worship atmospheres to be a place where the Spirit is invited and welcome and can move in power. But we also want to be students of the Word. We want to know the Bible. We want to know the God that we're singing to. We want our lyrics to be full of doctrine and truth and Christology and pneumatology. We want to understand that us as worship leaders, what does that job even mean? Where does it even come from? I mean, as I'm unpacking the scriptures, I'm starting to realize that our office is actually pulled from the Levitical priesthood, and that has huge ramifications for how we do what we do. And so I wanted to start a podcast unpacking theological concepts, unpacking the Bible, unpacking theology, the study of God, specifically for worship leaders. The next part of this verse is why I want to even do this. It says, "For the Father is seeking such people to worship him." I get this mental picture of the eyes of God looking to and fro over the nations, seeing these truth churches that are liturgical and are not experiencing emotion, seeing these emotion-filled churches that are just singing and crying and weeping and dancing, but aren't even singing to the right God. I just see him looking to and fro, and I see him finding that culture, that community that has balanced spirit and truth, that is crying out to him according to the scriptures and writing beautiful songs filled with scripture that is sharper than any double-edged sword, piercing straight to the heart. I think of God who's sovereign, and he's omniscient, and he's omnipotent. And if he says he's looking for something, if it's to be found, he's going to find it. And so the question it doesn't become, where do I find God, or how do I worship? The question really becomes, how can I be a person that God is looking for? And so I wanted to start this podcast. I want to be this community. I want to foster these type of worship leaders who know their Bible. And so, these are going to be, under 10 minutes. They're going to be kind of thoughts off the top of my head about theology. I want to talk about some things like the Levitical priesthood. I want to talk about what a grace-filled culture looks like. I want to talk about, I think I'm going to talk about why do we have choirs and are they important? Are they normative for today? I want to talk about things like the cumulative principle, and just kind of unpack some of these theological concepts in the hope that, God would raise a generation of spirit and truth worship leaders who find that balance, who fight every day to be filled with God's Spirit according to his word. And I wonder, what would God do? What would God do if a generation of worship leaders were able to walk this balance?